What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto disappeared for 10 years and returned with a mysterious wife? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. The hour was late. Kakashi Hitaki, Rokudame Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village, was tired. However, the subject of the meeting he was in required that it be shrouded in secrecy. And that subject was one Naruto Uzumaki. Before him sat three people. The first was Tsunade Senju, retired Godem Hokage and currently head of the Konoha Medical Division. The other two were Hiashi and Neji Hyuga, the current head and heir of the Hyuga clan. I have asked all of you here because I have an issue that I need help resolving, Hiashi said. Recently, I have been approached by a suitor for my youngest daughter, Hanabi. The clan elders have made their intentions known that I must do everything necessary to ensure that the union takes place. As such, it leaves me in a very precarious situation in regards to my oldest daughter, Hinata. Kakashi looked at Tsunade. We could avoid all this if you would just tell us what you know of the mission. After all, you're the one who sent them on it in the first place and you were the only one who received the mission report on their return. No, there's a reason that report was sealed. It's not my place to reveal that. You have to ask Sakura or Hinata. Kakashi's lone visible eye hardened. I could order you as Hokage to answer. And as a former Hokage I would refuse. I could order Sakura and Hinata to answer as Hokage. Tsunade snorted. And take two of the best kunoichi in the village and have them jailed in ambu cells for an undetermined period of time? Not to mention the fact that you would leave Hinata's son bereft of his only parent. Be that as it may, Hiashi said, the argument is pointless and distracts from the reason we asked for this meeting. We have made a decision regarding Hinata and need the help of you both to see it through. Tsunade looked up and said, We? Now it was Neji's turn to speak. Yes, my uncle and I came to this decision together. Hinata has had no suitors for her hand since her return. Her status in the village has suffered as a single parent and the name of the father is all but unknown except to a select few. He looked hard at Tsunade at the end of his statement. She just glared back at him, not revealing anything to his Hyuga eyes. However, everyone in this room knows of my cousin's deep and unrequited love for Naruto. It was my suggestion to uncle that if he could be found, Naruto would be an ideal husband for her. He is a man of unquestionable honor and integrity, and he understands what it means to grow up without a father. He would care for both Hinata and her son as if he were his own. Hiashi added, we would also provide him with a sizable dowry. The little Gaki isn't going to give a shit about that. And you're all forgetting something, Tsunade said. Naruto left this village 8 years ago a broken man. Even if we knew where he was, I'm pretty sure he isn't going to come back. He hasn't gotten reason to do so. The room was silent for a few moments before Kakashi spoke. I know where he is. I know how to contact him. And I'm pretty sure I know how to get him back home. How? The three others said in unison. We tell him that one of his precious people needs help that only he can provide. That should get him home. Naruto has never refused to come to the aid of those who are precious to him. Turning to Hiashi, he said, as for the rest, we just need to nudge him to make the right choice. Nudge? Yes, Hiashi. Nudge. Naruto needs to come to the proper decision on his own. However, that doesn't mean that we can't give him the incentive to come to that conclusion. And just how do we do that? Kakashi's eyes smiled and said, simple, you goad him into it. Assuming we get him home and he agrees to the meeting, you belittle Hinata every chance you get. I'm pretty sure after about 5 minutes he'll get so pissed at you that he'll agree to the marriage just to shut you up. Tsunade spoke. You're playing a dangerous game here, Kakashi. If he finds out what we're planning here, it could. That's why I'm making this an S-rank secret. No one outside of the four of us will speak of this meeting ever again. Kakashi rose from his seat, turned and stared out the window. After a few moments, he softly said, besides, if there is one thing I'm sure of, it's this. Turning around again, everyone could see the sadness in his gaze. The best cure for a broken heart is a love without questions, boundaries or conditions. And this is precisely the kind of love that Hinata holds for Naruto. The first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, preparing every living thing for another day. The sun seemed to awaken nature itself, as it moved in harmony with all that relied on its warmth. Naruto sat upon a rock, meditating as he did every morning in an attempt to find inner peace and tranquility. Some days this task was harder than others. Lately though, the peace that he had sought for so long seemed elusive. Even if he entered sage mode, it did little to help quell his inner turmoil and find balance. And this morning, his inner demon didn't seem to want to help him out any towards that goal. Kit, Kurama said, we both know that you dwell on the past. Peace does not come because of the pain that was forced upon you by the one you trusted and supposedly loved. In recent years, he and the Kyuubi had come to a mutual understanding. They both acknowledged that they would be with each other until death took them from this world. While Naruto had actively sought this in recent years, his strength had grown so considerably that the escape that death would bring was not so easy to accomplish. Thanks, Naruto responded. Glad you could bring that up. Again, no problem. However, I believe your morning meditation session may be over. I sense someone coming towards our position. Not very strong and certainly not much of a threat, but it's obvious that he's looking for you. Opening his eyes, he tensed and waited for the individual to arrive at his location. A lone man walked into the clearing wearing simple shinobi gear with a katana strapped to his back. There was no attempt at stealth. He certainly knew who Naruto was and that he was aware of his presence. The man walked up to him and dropped on both knees to the ground and bowed low. Lord Uzumaki, I am a messenger from Konoha. I bear an urgent message from our Hokage, Kakashi Hitaki for you. So Kakashi was Hokage now, interesting. And somehow he knew where he was. You've wasted your time. I have no desire to return to Konoha. Please leave. The man rose from his bow, remaining on his knees. Holding a scroll out in front of him, he said, Hokage-sama thought you would say that. He told me to say before I left that one of your precious people requires help that only you can provide. The rest of the message is contained in this scroll for your eyes only. Naruto looked upon the messenger, wondering if he should even look at it. Curiosity got the better of him and he took the scroll and unfurled it. The message was vague as to the nature of the emergency, but one name jumped off the page at him. Hinata. Emotions swirled up from deep within him as her image was brought forth from his memories. He remembered how kind and thoughtful she always was to him. He remembered her smile and her flawless beauty. She was definitely one of his precious people. He hesitated a few seconds before another voice answered his unspoken question. We both know you've made up your mind, Kit. She is too important to you to ignore the request, whatever that may be. Naruto looked at the messenger and rolled up the scroll and handed it back. I'll return with you. We leave immediately. Naruto burst out in laughter. That's a good joke, Kakashi-sensei. The laughter died on his lips after realizing that his old teacher wasn't laughing and was looking at him rather seriously. You gotta be joking. That cold eye continued looking at him, unperturbed. Please sensei, you're gotta be kidding me, right? No, I'm not. Hiyashi Hyuga expects to see you today in the afternoon. You will go and see him. And with this the Hokage returned to some papers in his hands. A range of emotions crossed the face of the young Jonin, anger and confusion surpassing all of them. He couldn't hold back as he struck the desk with his fist, regaining the attention of his former sensei. Kakashi raised his eye. Naruto ignored the cold look. I won't do it. It's unfair of you to force me. Haven't I given enough to this village? The right thing would be to allow me to choose for myself. I'm an adult, and I can. Kakashi interrupted him. What? 26 years old? He arched his eyebrow. Even I doubt it sometimes. Naruto remained silent, recognizing the tone of voice. It was uncompromising and icy, the kind that doesn't allow an argument or refusal. He saw his former sensei heave a sigh and continue with his usually laid-back attitude. You've been away from the village for almost 8 years. Even though I've known where you were for about 2 years or so, no one has any idea as to what you've been doing. You can't expect to find everything the way you left it. Change is the only constant, and people tend to forget what they conveniently want. Few people in the village remember what you did for them. They only remember the fear of what you represent, and I believe they need to be reminded of what you've sacrificed once again. Naruto took a hand to the back of his neck, accepting what Kakashi told him. But despite everything that's happened, there's one thing that hasn't changed, and that's your dream to someday be Hokage. His gaze hardened. It's not a dream, Kakashi-sensei. I will be Hokage. Believe it, then you have nothing to lose. I think this is an excellent proposition where both you and Hinata will benefit. At the very least you should speak with Hiashi and listen to his offer. It took several minutes of silence while Naruto reflected on Kakashi's words. At the moment, he couldn't come up with a logical argument as to why he should refuse. Alright, I'll listen to Hiashi. But I won't promise anything. That's fair enough. The Hokage conceded. At the time agreed for the appointment, Naruto felt a bit nervous. But all that changed after listening to Hiashi as he sat in the office of the clan head. Anger was boiling inside him as he listened to the man demean his eldest daughter. Like I said, it's no secret that Hinata's reputation is not impeccable and she doesn't have that many good qualities. Naruto gripped the chair arms with his hands, trying to hold down the impulse of jumping up and throttling the man. The stupid man wanted qualities? There were so many. She was brave, determined, compassionate. Besides, her beauty is average at best. Was he blind? She was one of the most beautiful women he'd ever seen. And on top of it all she has the problem of that bastard son. Hinata has never revealed who the father is. I understand that it isn't appealing for anyone to take care of another man's child and be responsible for his care and upbringing. We don't even know to what lineage he belongs. Naruto couldn't take it anymore. If he didn't stop the asshole he would choke him to death. Alright, I accept. Hiashi looked at him, annoyed at being interrupted. I don't think I've finished yet. And I don't need to hear anything else. I'll marry her and you can rest assured that you no longer need to take care of her and her despicable bastard. He quickly stood up, ignoring how Hiashi's face was turning red with anger. Just tell me one thing. Do you dislike your daughter so much that you would throw her at the first man who asks for her hand? Don't you think you should ask her what she wants? This decision wasn't made on a whim. Hiashi straightened in his chair. We've thought of every possibility for this situation. One word stuck with him in that sentence, and he raised a hand to interrupt. We? Who exactly are we? Hiashi. My nephew and I. Neji? Was that possible? Naruto thought that he'd changed his attitude towards his cousin, but perhaps not. After hearing the comments by Kakashi earlier, he realized that maybe things in the village had reverted to how they were many years ago. If you marry my daughter, you will not only receive a large dowry as compensation. Naruto looked at him with interest, seeing the disgust on his face and sensing that the next thing that would be said was a bitter pill to swallow for the proud Hyuga. But you will also become a member of our renowned clan. This last comment made Naruto consider asking another question, suddenly suspecting an ulterior motive behind this proposal. Tell me something, Hiashi. Why exactly are you so eager to get rid of Hinata? Hiashi gave the man a blank stare. Our clan has received an offer for Hanabi's hand in marriage. It would be a shame to lose this opportunity because of Hinata. A smile appeared on the face of the Jonin, as he leaned close to Hiashi and said in a chilling voice, therefore you prefer that her situation didn't interfere with your plans, is that right? Hearing the tone of his voice, Hiashi suddenly felt threatened. He'd heard rumors that the young man sitting in front of him had become far more powerful during his time away from the village, and if he wanted to, he could get rid of him in the blink of an eye. In any case, she has to marry sooner or later. Having experienced it firsthand, you would know better than anybody that a child should have a father figure in his life. Naruto regretted having asked, realizing that of course Hiashi would bring something like that up. The man infuriated him every time he opened his mouth. He turned on his heels to leave the place. Hiashi called out as he left and said, well, at least we have an agreement. The blonde didn't bother to answer him. He wanted to be as far from him as possible, afraid that he might do something he clearly wouldn't regret. Opening the door and rushing through it, he ran into someone. Both of them fell to the ground, landing on their backside. Quickly getting back up, his first instinct was to extend his hand, offering to help up the person he had inadvertently run into. Lavender eyes stared back at him, the shock clearly visible on her face. Nah, Naruto-kun? He withdrew his hand as if burned by her touch. Hinata. It was all he could say before leaving, embarrassed and afraid at finally coming face to face with her. She noticed the emotions running over his face, the first, and most prominent, emotion being anger. It was then that she saw her father walking out of his office, the corners of his mouth upturned in a slight smile. Hinata looked at him, mistrusting his motives for having Naruto there in the first place. What have you done, father? Despite the smile on his face, his tone was somber as he replied, what I should have done a long time ago. That cryptic comment lingered in the air between them. Fear froze her heart as she turned and ran down the hallway to her room. Once there, she closed the door and leaned against it, trying to rein in her rapidly beating heart. What did her father say to Naruto-kun for him to run out of the place, looking angry and afraid? She placed both hands on her cheeks, feeling them flushed and hot beneath her touch. She'd heard rumors of him returning to the village, but hadn't had the opportunity to see him until a few minutes ago. And once again, her world was turned upside down. What was this strange power he had over her? Even after all this time, just seeing him made her lightheaded, barely able to stand on her trembling legs. The emotion that he awoke within her was almost overpowering. She took a deep breath and let it out, annoyed with herself. She'd thought that she would have left behind all that nonsense when she became a mother. A soft knock on her door brought her out of her musings, and she bade whoever it was to enter. "Ni-san?" She was concerned to see the serious look on his face. "Is something wrong? Has anything happened to Hikaru?" "No, cousin. He's just fine. I left him with one of the maids for the moment. He's eating a snack." Hinata saw him falter, unsure of his next words with her. She had never seen him like that. "Please walk with me for a moment, Hinata." She nodded at his strange request and followed him as he walked to the courtyard. Hinata looked at her cousin with an expression full of disbelief and shock. "I'm to marry," she repeated, baffled, and then added with a barely audible voice, "Naruto-kun?" He nodded. "Yes. You need a husband, and your child needs a father." Her look hardened before forcefully replying, "I believe you're mistaken. I've done just fine on my own." Neji could not hold back the small smile that appeared on his lips. Motherhood has done wonders for Hinata. It provided her with a peculiar strength, making her somewhat willful at times. "How could father and you do this to me? How dare you both to decide my life like this? What did you expect, cousin?" Uncle would not stand idly when a suitor for Hanabi came into the picture. "You know that he will do everything necessary to assure the union that has been presented." She looked away from Neji's face. An agonizing pain, one that she knew since childhood, emerged from the depths of her being, choking her. It was the forcefulness in Neji's voice that drew her back. "All this can be avoided if you tell us the name of the father." Her eyes looked at him and hardened over again. "Never. I'm still puzzled as to why you keep protecting him." "Forget it, Ni-san. Let bygones be bygones." Neji raised his eyebrows. "Though, there's something I've always wondered about, why Hikaru hasn't inherited the Byakugan." Hinata pressed her lips together and looked away from him. His father must have very dominant genes. Her face turned pale. She had asked Neji to practice with Hikaru from an early age, knowing fully what questions might arise because of it. But that doesn't mean that the boy doesn't have talent. Neji continued, ignoring Hinata's sullen silence. "Quite the contrary, he does, and when he fully develops he will be a formidable opponent." She smiled as Neji described her son, her chest swelling with pride. "However, I wish he could take everything with a degree of seriousness, and be more mindful and alert when I try to explain things to him." And this time he looked carefully at Hinata, trying to see if a sudden expression gave something away. Not to mention that he is so restless as well as excitable. Guessing what he was trying to bring up, she quickly added, "Well, you can't blame him if he is very energetic and full of life." He sighed, never suspecting that his cousin could be so stubborn. Something told him she was not being entirely honest with him. He did not understand the reason for her strange behavior, keeping the whole business secret. But the more he thought about it, the more his blood began to boil over with anger. "If anyone dared to take advantage of you, I swear all." She looked at him with conviction and didn't let him finish. "Neji, no one has abused me." Venting some of his frustration and trying to get a rise from her, he bitterly asked, "Is he married?" Hinata gritted her teeth. How many times have she endured this interrogation? "He's surely a womanizer, right?" Neji growled. "It's useless to discuss it. I won't say anything. It was in the village where Tsunade-sama sent you with Sakura, right? To this strange mission that none of the three of you want to talk about. Almost a year away from Konoha. I swear that if I ever find out who he is, I will make him suffer an agonizing death before ending his useless life." "Neji," she yelled, before taking a deep breath to calm herself. She placed her hand on her cousin's arm. "Really, I'm thankful for your concern and—" She had to smile before she continued, "your desire to defend my honor. You better than anyone else know that we need to leave the past behind. You have a nephew who loves you and worships the ground you walk on. Isn't that more important?" He sighed, defeated. He decided to continue, ignoring the small deviation from the main conversation. As I was saying, it was evident that Uncle would do something about your present situation. As such, I wouldn't have allowed you to leave with just anyone who accepted Uncle's proposal. It was I who suggested that Uncle choose Naruto as a possible candidate. I'm sure he'll know how to take care of Hikaru and you. He is the best choice of all that could have been taken into consideration. Why Naruto-kun? She asked in a small voice. Because despite what almost everybody in the village thinks, he is a man with a high level of honesty and integrity. And it's clear from your actions that you still care for him in some way. I don't want to be a burden to anyone. Don't worry, Hinata. Believe me, he also wins in the whole situation. In addition to your generous dowry, he also has the prestige of being part of the Hyuga clan. You talk as if he's accepted? According to Uncle, yes, he has. She was sure that her face has taken the highest shade of scarlet. A swirl of emotions lashed at her insides. Shame and humiliation at the devious way that they decided at her back. Anger that they didn't take into account her wishes. Above all this, however, there was a degree of euphoria. Naruto-kun becoming her husband? How many times as a child had she dreamed about that impossible event? But after acquiring a degree of maturity in recent years, and then being a mother, she thought she had left behind all those childhood fantasies. And yet, despite her belief that he would never return, she had kept a piece of her heart as an exclusive property of the blonde. Then, as if someone slapped her in the face, she recalled how he had left. Now she understood the cause of his hasty departure. Oh, no, Ni-san, I have to talk to him. Do you think you can do it without fainting? He taunted. Hinata looked at him somewhat annoyed. Of course I can. It's been a long time since I lost my nerve in his presence. I'll find him and apologize to him for the inconvenience. He needs to understand that this isn't his responsibility. Neji watched his cousin as she walked decisively towards the village, a tiny smile curving his lips. He let her go, not worried at all. Knowing Naruto as a champion of the weak and embracing any cause to help others, Hinata would be skillfully swerved from her objective. He had a pretty good idea of how the meeting had transpired between his uncle and Naruto, betting that the latter had been on the verge of losing his temper with his uncle's arrogant attitude and constant humiliation of Hinata. As they had thought, Naruto could never swallow any type of abuse towards his precious people and had decided to accept the offer simply to help her out, achieving the goal that they themselves had set out from the beginning. And although he knew that his cousin didn't need anyone and could take care of her or her son, Neji wanted Hinata to finally have someone who supported and listened to her. She had suffered far too much, and with the possible exception of her son, he knew she loved Naruto more than anything. And who knows? Perhaps they had manipulated the situation in a way that things would take the right course, eventually. Naruto was standing on a rooftop, overlooking the village and thinking of possibilities. He closed his eyes, raising his face to the sky to feel the sun's rays stroking his skin as a soft breeze ruffled his blonde hair. Shortly after returning to the village, he had overheard by chance two women talking about Hinata and the shame, or the lack of it, according to the women, of coming back with a child after going away with Sakura on the mission that Tsunade, who was then Hokage, had ordered them to take. Now that he had accepted Hiashi's offer, he was curious to know who the father of Hinata's son was. So without wasting any time, he had gone looking for Sakura at the apartment she shared with Sasuke. Seeing her again after all these years had shaken him up both emotionally and physically, reopening old wounds and bringing back memories that he thought were forgotten. As she welcomed him into their home, he observed that she looked happy, her presence practically glowing. He couldn't help but realize that she really was beautiful. Sakura quickly informed him that Sasuke wasn't home if he was looking for him. But as soon as he explained that he was here to see her and ask about Hinata and her son, her whole appearance changed abruptly, becoming unapproachable and unyielding. *flashback******. No. He looked at her, shocked. Why the sudden change in demeanor? What do you mean, no? Just what I said. No, I won't tell you anything about Hikaru. Why? You both went on that mission, you had to know something. Naruto, Sakura said forcefully. I already said I'm not answering your questions. Now stop asking. The expression on Naruto's face became hard and cold. He stared at her and said, this isn't how I expected our first conversation in years to play out, Sakura. I'm disappointed that it hasn't gone better. Then get used to disappointment. You won't find your answer here. So either ask about something else, or leave. Asterisk end flashback asterisk asterisk asterisk. And Naruto left the apartment with more questions than when he arrived. What the hell was the damn mystery surrounding Hinata and her son? He was sure that she knew something. She went on that mission with Hinata, so she had to know the whole affair. What was she hiding? And why? There was only one other person he could ask about this. He hadn't been by to see her yet, but he was pretty sure that the conversation would mirror the one he just had with Sakura. Not that it would change his mind about asking, of course. He was going to talk with Tsunade. Raising his head and opening his eyes, he took off in the direction of the hospital. Tsunade had just finished with another exhausting day at the hospital. An open bottle of very good sake was on her desk, and she had been drinking for the last half hour. It was her way of relaxing at the end of a very hard day. Or any other day for that matter. Just as she was about to pour herself another cup, she heard a knock on her door and told whoever it was to come in. The door opened and Naruto walked in. She stared at him for a few seconds as tears filled her eyes, grateful to see him after all these years. Naruto smiled at her and said, "Hey, Ba-chan. It's good to see you again." And in the blink of an eye she was there and hugging him, crying into his shoulder. "Gaki, I was so worried about you. I missed you so much." Naruto knew how much he meant to her. Her life had been filled with the deaths of those she loved, first Nawaki, her little brother. Then Dan, the love of her young life. And then Jiraiya, one of the Sannin and her former teammate. The love of her later life. The man whom Naruto affectionately called Pervy Sage, and was the closest thing to a father figure he ever had. He was all she had left. And he felt a new wave of guilt for being away for so long. After a minute, Tsunade lifted her head and let go of him. Looking him over and wiping her eyes, she smiled and said, "Well, you've certainly gotten taller. And you're not as high-spirited as you once were. I'm guessing a lot of things have happened over the last 8 years." He laughed and said, "You don't know the half of it. Got time to talk and catch up on things? I could really use a drink right now." She laughed, glad to have the company. "Gaki, that is one thing that I can provide." The two of them sat and talked for about 2 hours. Tsunade filled him in on most of what had been going on in the village. She had decided a few years ago to step down and work full-time at the hospital, as well as starting an academy for medical ninjutsu for the shinobi corps. With Naruto gone, Kakashi was the most logical choice to take the job, but they both knew he was just holding the position for Naruto, if he ever returned. Naruto talked about some of the things that had happened to him over the last 8 years. He didn't need to go over it all. As Hokage he was sure Tsunade knew some of it. At least the parts that mattered. Then he asked about all of his friends and how they were doing. She told him Neji and Tenten had gotten married. Ino, Kiba, Choji and Shino were still single. Shikamaru and Tamari were still dating. Apparently he thinks it's too troublesome to propose. Gaara was still cage and currently dating one of his students. Tsunade stopped the conversation there, and sat in silence drinking her sake. Naruto bristled a bit after several seconds and asked, "Well? What else? What else is there? I'm sure you already know about Sakura and Hinata." "No, I don't." She smiled at him. "Ah, now we come to the real reason why you're here." Yeah, he knew he had the worst poker face ever. "Okay, I did come here to talk about that. But I also wanted to see you as well. You are one of my precious people, after all." "Thank you, Naruto. You're special to me as well." Then there was that uncomfortable silence again. He knew she was doing it on purpose and it was beginning to make his blood pressure rise. "And? What else?" And once again that smile. "Sorry, there is nothing else. Ba-chan, you know there is. I'm sure that even though you're retired from being Hokage, there isn't much that slips by you. You knew why I was brought back here." She smirked at him. "Maybe, and maybe not." He let that slide. "Fine, you should know that I've accepted Hiashi's proposal and agreed to marry Hinata." Tsunade's face lit up upon hearing this and her smile was perhaps the biggest he'd ever seen on her. "Congratulations. I know the both of you will be very happy. She's a wonderful woman. Thank you. But now that I've accepted his proposal and agreed to the marriage, I think I have a right to know who the father of her son is." Tsunade lost her smile and her face became impassive. "Why don't you ask Sakura?" He raised his voice a bit and said, "I already tried that. She shut me down and told me no, rather emphatically. Then she told me that if I continued to ask questions about Hinata and her son, then I should just leave." Which I'm guessing is what happened. And here you are, talking with the last person who could possibly provide you with the information that you want. Sorry Naruto, but you won't find the answers you're looking for here. I'm not that drunk. Why, Ba-chan, why can't you tell me? Once again, that uncomfortable silence. But when Tsunade spoke again, her voice was soft and caring. Naruto. He looked at her eyes and saw sympathy. But he also saw no chance of her buckling under the pressure. There's a reason why I can't tell you. But regardless of what it is, the only person who can, and frankly should tell you, is Hinata. Have you talked with her yet? He closed his eyes, leaned back in his seat, somewhat afraid of the answer. No. Tsunade poured herself the last bit of sake and quickly downed it, placing the empty glass on the desk. Then don't you think it's about time that you do? He ran across the rooftops towards the Hyuga estate, lost in thought once again and reflecting on what Tsunade had said. He agreed with her that he should ask Hinata, but he was also pretty sure that the conversation would end the same way, with him angry and his questions unanswered. There had to be another way he could possibly find out what he wanted to know. The only thought left to him was that he hadn't had an opportunity to see the boy. Perhaps his looks or some physical feature could provide him with some clue. He didn't see the movement that pulled him out of his introspection, rather he felt it. He directed his gaze toward the small distraction. It was a small red-haired kid, who Naruto thought looked to be about 6 or 7 years old. The boy was hiding behind some wooden crates, his eyes peeking about above them. With a graceful somersault, Naruto fell to the ground and silently approached him. The redhead was watching a small laundry business. Naruto recognized the place and who the owner was. She was one of the women that he had heard talking about Hinata and her immorality. The blonde tilted his head, recalling his childhood and the pranks he used to play. He was so engrossed in watching the child that when the scream of anger came from the building, it took him by surprise. Naruto lifted his face to stare as the outraged owner ran outside, looking for the culprit who was responsible. Amid all the noise and fuss, an interested Naruto leaned over and asked, "What did you do?" The boy jumped, certain that he'd been caught and would be punished. "I didn't do anything," he replied defensively, while the blush on his cheeks betrayed him. Naruto crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked at the boy with skepticism. "Right, and I don't like ramen, either." Shocked, the redhead's eyes grew wide and he said, "You don't like ramen?" Naruto rolled his eyes. Apparently, the kid still didn't understand the concept of sarcasm. "No, I was being sarcastic." "That means I don't believe you." Suddenly the boy stood up and retorted with enough insolence, "What if I did do something?" The young ninja stared at the kid. The boy didn't seem to be trying to attract attention to himself like Naruto used to do when he was younger. He wasn't trying to be playful either. Instead, he seemed very angry. It wasn't at Naruto, but just what it was specifically was uncertain. "You." Both of them turned their faces toward the owner of the laundromat. Instinctively, the boy hid behind Naruto. "I'm sure it was you, brat." It was probably wrong of him to cover for the boy, but an automatic response to protect the kid burst forth from deep inside him. Looking at the lady and feigning ignorance, Naruto asked, "What are you talking about?" He poured ink into the water I used to rinse the white laundry. Naruto flinched internally. "Well, I'm afraid to say you're mistaken. He's been with me the entire morning." He only hoped that he was doing the right thing. Naruto had always been uncomfortable lying to people. Actually, he was pretty bad at it. While they had been together, Sakura had always known when he was hiding something because it was so blatantly obvious. At that moment he was feeling quite a bit disgusted with his lie, but he still wanted to speak with the boy first. First things first, though. He needed to come up with a way for the kid to repair the damages he had inflicted. He pointed down the street and said, "However, I did see some suspicious kids running in that direction." For a few seconds the blonde thought the owner of the laundromat would refute him. After a few seconds, she turned away grumbling about how city trash always ended up joining forces. As she walked back into her business and closed the door, Naruto looked at the boy with disapproval. "So, ink in the water. Hardly creative for a prank, and not very original. I don't want to think about how those sheets ended up. Tell me, what's the problem you have with her?" The red-headed kid scrunched his face, making a menacing scowl. "Her favorite pastime is to say really bad things about my mom." "Your mother?" "Yes. Hinata Hyuga." Hinata was starting to get worried. She had no idea where Naruto had gone, and she'd been asking everyone she could if they had seen him. Places that people had seen him varied all over the village and none of the leads had turned up positive. However, her concern quickly became apprehension when the last few people she'd asked not only indicated where he was going, but who was with him. I saw him just a few minutes ago, walking with your son by the way. I think he went that way, he was with your son. They were talking about you. Hinata gave the man a worried look. Please, do you know where they were headed? The man blinked and said, I'm pretty sure they were going to eat Ichiraku ramen. Ichiraku ramen, she silently cursed herself. Why didn't she think of starting there in the first place? It was Naruto's favorite place to eat after all, and he probably hadn't seen Teuchi or Ayame since returning to the village. With any luck he would still be there, finishing his 15th bowl of ramen. With her son, she began walking quickly towards the cozy restaurant, attempting to calm her erratic heartbeat. She was concerned about losing him again. She needed to talk with him and convince him to forget about his promise. But why was Naruto with Hikaru? She tried to ignore the pit that was forming in her stomach. There was no way he could know, and yet, someone also mentioned they had seen him leaving Sakura and Sasuke's apartment. No, she was absolutely sure that Sakura didn't say anything. However, without realizing it she started to run, sprinting through the streets and ignoring the curious glances that everybody gave her. She walked into the small establishment almost out of breath, looking for a redhead and a blonde. She spotted them at the end of the counter, Hikaru peppering Naruto with questions about many things. Hikaru, she exclaimed and quickly walked towards them both. She looked at Hikaru, trying to figure out what they had been talking about, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary in that little face she loved so much. What are you doing outside the compound? Didn't your uncle leave you in the kitchen? Mom, he answered, his face taking on an expression of pure innocence. Standing on the stool, he hugged his mother and covered her face with kisses saying, You're so pretty, Mom. He stopped when he saw that his mother remained unfazed by his loving attack. She had her arms crossed in front of her chest and was staring down at him sternly. Save it, mister. You're not getting out of trouble that easy. I'm going to make sure your uncle assigns you chores as punishment. You disobeyed him and rest assured that I will be supervising what your uncle decides to give you. Naruto stared at Hikaru, fascinated at the scene unfolding before him. This was a lost part of his life, something he never had growing up. It was an experience that he would never be able to recover, and the ache of that loss was plainly visible in his eyes. The experience of having a mother. The feeling of knowing that no matter how hard things were, someone was always there to wrap their warm, loving arms around you and make you feel safe. Hinata felt his intense blue gaze and turned her head to look at him. She was shaken by the degree of longing in his eyes and her heart was consumed with anguish. She immediately recognized that look, the desire to have a mother. To know what is to be loved unconditionally by someone never asking for anything in return. The one person who can make your pain all go away, just by being who she is and nothing more. Hello, Naruto-kun. His sapphire eyes immediately lit up and he turned to look at her, a smile appearing on his lips. And just as quick, every trace of sadness disappeared from his face. Hello, Hinata. His voice sent shivers down her spine. It's been a long time without seeing each other. She nodded, struggling to keep herself calm. She returned his smile and said, 8 years. Hinata studied the face that stared back at her intensely. This wasn't the boy she had a crush on back in the academy, nor the man she had loved as a teenager. All traces of his youth had vanished and now she saw a man staring back at her, one that has lived and seen too much. And somehow, she found him more handsome than ever, the distinct hardness of his features providing him with a unique beauty, both outside and inside. The years have been good to you, Hinata. You're more beautiful than ever. She blushed, realizing that she'd also received the same inspection from him. Thank you, she mumbled. If Neji could only see her now. She'd throw it in his face that she hadn't fainted or gotten woozy even once in Naruto's presence. Then she remembered why she'd been looking for him in the first place. I'd like to talk to you, Naruto-kun. He nodded and said, all right. Let's go for a walk. He left enough money on the counter to cover the bill for both Hikaru and himself, and waved goodbye to Teuchi. Gently grasping her elbow, he led her outside the restaurant to take her to a more secluded and quiet place. He thought the park would be nice. As they walked in silence, Naruto pondered the situation. Hikaru was clutching his mother's hand, giving them both a curious look. He could feel the tension in the air and knew something was going to happen. Now, Naruto knew that he wasn't the smartest person around, but he wasn't an idiot either. The harsh reality of the last 8 years of his life had given him a sense of maturity and knowledge beyond his years, and it was obvious what Hinata's intention was. However, no matter what it took, he wasn't going to allow her to change his mind. He didn't want to let her go. So as soon as they reached the park, he resolved not let her talk and weasel her way out of the situation. "Hikaru, go play on the swings for a while," Hinata told her son. He narrowed his eyes, wanting to hear what he suspected was going to be a very interesting conversation. However, he was in hot water already with his mom, and knowing that a punishment was coming later that evening, he decided not to make it worse and turned to walk towards the swings. As soon as Hikaru was out of earshot, Hinata turned and said, "Naruto." He quickly interrupted her. "I'm glad you wanted to talk with me." You are?" Her heart felt like lead in her chest. Was her desire to relieve him of the responsibility he'd accepted so great? She would give him every reason and opportunity to regret having accepted the proposal in the first place. "Yes, we need to set the date." The date? She was trying to get him to realize that she and Hikaru were not his responsibility. But somehow, he was steering the conversation in the opposite direction, and it was confusing her. "Yes, I think the right date for the ceremony would be the first day of summer. It gives us enough time to plan and for me to look for a place for the three of us to live." "But, Naruto-kun," he cut her off again. "Don't you think the date is perfect? And I've been thinking about buying one of those new houses located on the outskirts of Konoha. Unless, of course, you don't think you'll like it." "Oh, the resort community is very nice and convenient. But great." Once again, he didn't let her finish. "It's the new place then. But they're very expensive, and that wasn't what I wanted to talk to you about." Hinata was beginning to suspect that he'd guessed why she'd been looking for him. "Don't worry about the money." He didn't allow her to speak once again. "Now, about the ceremony. Do you have anyone in particular that you'd want to marry us? Because I think I'd like Kakashi-sensei to do it." "Naruto-kun." The irritation in her voice was apparent as she tried to get a word in edgewise. "And what about the venue? I think it would be nice if we have it at the—" Naruto. Blue eyes stared at her, astounded. Irritated, she had firmly raised her voice and stopped him in mid-sentence. It was the same voice she used with Hikaru when he didn't listen to her. "What are you doing?" she asked. He blinked. "Well, isn't it obvious?" "Yes, it is. But what I don't understand is your reason behind everything you've said. I want you to know that you're not obligated to marry me." He looked at her, stunned. For a few seconds he was at a loss for words, then a small smile played over his lips. "I know. I want to do it." She stared at him, confused. Desperate to give him a reason to forget the whole thing, she blurted out the most far-fetched idea she could come up with. "If the reason why you're doing this is because you need money, then all you have to do is ask." "I don't need money from you or any other member of your clan." He cut in coldly. "And your family can keep the dowry. I don't want it, or need it to marry you." This conversation was starting to sound exactly the same as the one he'd had with Hiashi earlier that day. She couldn't see the wonderful qualities she possessed. On the outside, she was beautiful beyond words. But he knew that beneath that beauty was a kind, compassionate and strong woman. It seemed that despite the time that had passed, she still suffered from the same insecurities she had as a child. And he knew her family was the reason for it. She saw the look in his eyes. By suggesting that he had an ulterior motive, she had unintentionally hurt him. She quickly apologized, not knowing what else to do. "I'm sorry, Naruto-kun." He nodded his head, accepting it. He wished he could tell her. If she only knew. If everyone in the village only knew how he wanted to just forget everything. Leave his past and so many awful memories behind. Memories of a childhood lost, where he was ostracized and hunted for what he held. Of believing he had found the love he so desperately sought, only to have his heart ripped painfully from his chest, without a second thought as to how it would affect him. Decisions that later in life he regretted, because they had led him down a path of self-destruction, and away from what might possibly have been true happiness. He thought back to a few days ago when the messenger had found him. He didn't know what to expect. The message had been intentionally vague. However, it became painfully clear when he met with Kakashi-sensei what the situation with Hinata was. At first he'd resisted the idea of marrying her. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps he felt he didn't need a change in his life. That he was all right with the way things were. Then, Hiashi made the offer. He'd belittled Hinata enough during the meeting that when he finally hit his breaking point, he'd accepted his proposal without a second thought. And now, here was Hinata offering him a chance to walk away from the promise he made. But one thing Hinata forgot is that he never goes back on a promise. Ever. And the more he thought about it, the more the idea of having a family began to appeal to him. He wanted to be a husband and a father, offering his strength and support to them no matter how good or bad things became. The idea of coming home to someone and just talking about your day, or doing tasks around the house filled him with a sense of warmth that he hadn't felt in a long time. He wanted to give someone the feeling he never had growing up. The feeling that he'd missed so much. He was sure that they would help him fill that void in his heart. Help him forget how much everything hurt. Her voice pulled him out of his thoughts. It's just that I think you should marry someone you love, and not someone who's been forced upon you. Love? He chuckled, laughing softly. That sound alone gave Hinata goosebumps. You, better than anyone else, should know that love isn't real. She looked at him, shocked at his statement. This wasn't the Naruto that she remembered. What happened to the happy, carefree man she knew? The one who always smiled, no matter how bad the situation. She silently wondered what happened that made him so cynical about love. Could what happened with Sakura have hurt him that much? Or was it something else? What happened to make him like this? She lifted her head and stated defiantly, I do believe in love. I think you're being overly optimistic, Naruto argued. If love exists, then tell me. Where's Hikaru's father? Where has he been all this time? Why hasn't he cared enough to be here for both of you, rather than allow your reputation to be dragged through the mud? Hinata didn't have an answer for that, and stared at her feet silently. He pressed her for an answer. Who's the father? Immediately, Naruto could tell she wasn't expecting to hear the question, especially not from him, and not in that manner. Her demeanor became hard and rigid, and the emotional walls that she had let down were suddenly back. She narrowed her eyes and answered him coldly, that's none of your business. Not wanting to give an inch, he responded in kind. I believe it is. I've accepted your father's proposal, therefore it gives me the right to ask. She refused to yield to his demands. And I still haven't accepted my father's proposal. He ignored her and asked, do you love him? She noticed that his voice was still firm, but now had an undertone of anger. He needed to know for some reason. Do you still love him? Her head came up and met his gaze. She looked into his eyes, those beautiful blue eyes, and saw the anger along with a new emotion, fear. What was he afraid of? This was Naruto. He'd fought battles against impossible odds and never flinched. The look he was giving her both confused and terrified her at the same time. She had to leave, to get as far away from him as she could before she lost control. But her body wouldn't move and her heart was beating so fast she thought it was going to explode at any second. Where was Hikaru? She spotted him hanging from one of the trees that surrounded the park. He was her way out of this. She needed to get to him and walk away quickly, before something happened. I have to go, she said, barely containing her anxiety. As she stood up and tried to walk past him, he grabbed her arm and turned her face to look at him. Do I know him? He stared at her face, looking for something that would confirm his line of questioning. Is he married? He saw her gaze falter a bit, and suddenly everything seemed to make sense to him. That's it, he's married and the two of you are lovers. That's why you don't want to marry me. You're still secretly seeing each other. The sound of her hand hitting Naruto's face echoed throughout the park. They stared at each other for several seconds. Naruto was shocked while Hinata was angry. She spoke first and broke the silence. That was uncalled for. Let me go. Right now. The tone of voice she used made it very clear that there wasn't room for discussion. He released her arm and watched silently as she walked to Hikaru. Grabbing his hand, she left the park with her back rigid, dragging her son along. She didn't look back. He sat there, shocked. The mark on his cheek was slowly fading thanks to the nine-tailed fox, but the emotional pain that it caused still lingered. What the hell had possessed him to act like that? He had no information, no evidence that anything he'd just said was true, yet he'd continued to pepper her with questions until she'd had enough and left, angry and hurt. At that moment, he realized that the way he'd acted towards Hinata was just like Hiashi did with him earlier that day, and the thought made him sick to his stomach. Naruto closed his eyes, lost in thought. He really didn't have the right to demand anything from her, especially who Hikaru's father was. And did it really matter? If he married her, wouldn't both of them become his, just as he would become theirs? He wondered what the reason behind this overwhelming need was. His first thought was that maybe it was from his meeting with Sakura earlier that day, where she had been curt and unemotional, as usual giving him nothing to help ease his confusion or pain, before sending him on his way. Sakura didn't know it yet, but both she and Sasuke were going to be parents. While sometimes he still had problems reading emotions and body language, he was quite adept at noticing physical changes in the human body, and the telltale signs were there. He was happy for them both, but he also realized with a twinge of jealousy that he wanted what they had. He wanted a family. He wanted it more than anything. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The one person who had loved him more than anything, who had confessed her love to him almost at the cost of her own life, needed his help, and what had he done? He'd pestered her with embarrassing and painful questions, until she'd finally had enough and left with her son, angry and hurt at his words. He'd been given an opportunity, and he'd blown it. Big time. The guilt over his actions suddenly gripped his heart. He realized that he was no better than Hiashi. He'd ignored Hinata's feelings for him all those years ago after the fight with Pain, and he was ignoring them now. All things considered, Hinata had let him off lightly, but it still didn't stop him from coming to the conclusion that he'd really fucked things up royally. He needed to find her and apologize, and hopefully she would forgive him and grant him a second chance. A chance to make up for all the mistakes he'd made in his life where she was concerned. A chance to finally make things right. He shook his head, trying to erase the painful memories from his thoughts. They weren't helping right now, and dwelling on the idea of what-ifs and could-have-beens wasn't making things any easier. Standing up with new purpose, he wondered how he could possibly fix this. He needed to convince Hinata that he could be a good husband and provider, as well as a good father to Hikaru. And then an idea came to him. Maybe he just needed to go back to the basics. Looking up, he noticed the sun was starting to set. He didn't have much time to put this new plan into action. Smiling, he took off running towards the wealthy district of Konoha. Sakura heard a knock on her door, and when she opened it, her eyes became wide with shock. "Hinata? What are you doing here?" Hinata stared at her. Sakura had never been a very warm and caring person to anyone other than Sasuke, but in the last several years her curt tone of voice had gotten worse. It wasn't necessarily cold, just abrupt and unconcerned. "Hello, Sakura. I need to talk with you about things. May I please come in?" Sakura stepped aside to let her enter. Hinata came in and sat on the couch, playing with her fingers like she did when she was nervous. Something was clearly wrong, and based on who her earlier visitor was, she had a pretty good idea what it could be. A tea kettle began to whistle in the kitchen. Turning to Hinata, she said, "I was just getting ready to have some tea. Would you like some?" Hinata thought this might help quell her nerves and nodded. "Some oolong tea would be nice, if you have it." Indicating that she did, Sakura went into the kitchen and prepared the tea, placing it on a serving tray along with some cookies. She was fairly sure that this was going to be a long conversation and they were going to need something to eat during it. She came back into the living room, set down the tray and gave Hinata her tea. For a few minutes, they just sat there in silence until finally Sakura realized that she was still very nervous. Deciding to start the conversation, she asked, "Why are you here, Hinata?" Her eyes had a haunted look. "I need someone to talk to, and some advice. You're the only person I can talk with about this. Is it about the boy?" Hinata glared at her. "Hikaru. His name is Hikaru, Sakura. Stop calling him the boy, because he has a name and I would appreciate it if you would use it." Sakura rolled her eyes and said, "Fine. It still doesn't answer the question as to why you're here, but I'm guessing it's got something to do with Naruto. What's going on between you two? And why do you look like you've been chased by ghosts?" If only she knew how true her statement was, because she felt like she was being chased by ghosts. Ghosts from her past. Hinata looked at her carefully. Sakura's tone of voice had turned defensive and she wondered why. "Why do you want to know?" "Naruto came by here earlier to visit, at least that's what he told me. But he wasn't really interested in hearing about me or Sasuke. He just kept asking questions about who Hikaru's father is." The color drained from Hinata's face and she said, "Did you tell him anything?" "No. I told him he could either stop asking or leave. He left. Do you think he knows anything?" "Naruto?" Sakura snorted. "Of course not. You can wave something right under his nose and he'd still be totally clueless." Hinata thought about the conversation she just had with Naruto. "Not from what I just saw. I talked with him just a little while ago. He's changed, Sakura. He's not the same happy kid who saw the good in everything. He's become insensitive and hard-hearted. Sakura shrugged, indifferent. I didn't notice anything unusual. He seemed the same to me. Hinata scowled at the offhand comment. None of you actually knew him like I did. I watched him from the shadows and sidelines as he hid behind a false image, hiding the pain he really felt. Sakura didn't have an answer for that statement and sat there, blank and unresponsive. Hinata fought to choke back the tears that were forming in her eyes. He even told me that love isn't real. That he doesn't believe in love anymore. She looked at Sakura, who sat there unemotional. What did you do to him? Excuse me? The tears were falling from her eyes. I'm sure Naruto-kun has seen and done many things over the last 8 years that would haunt most people. But that wouldn't explain why he said that. Her eyes bored into Sakura's. The only explanation is that his heart was broken so severely, that the idea of love existing in his life again is too painful a concept to believe in. Sakura pursed her lips and said, And we were together on that mission for almost a year. There was never a time, not once, that we talked about what he meant to you. Or what really happened between the two of you before you left the village. Sakura scoffed and said, It doesn't matter anymore. What happened between us is dead and buried. That's not the answer I'm looking for. Well, it's the only answer you're going to get. I'll tell you the same thing I told Naruto. Stop asking about this and move on to another subject. Hinata was starting to get angry with her flippant attitude. She decided that Sakura needed a taste of her own medicine. With a confidence that belied her inner anxiety, she said, Father has asked him to marry me. It had the desired effect. Sakura's face lost all color and she quickly blurted out, You can't marry him. That one statement put her over the edge. Her voice took on the same tone she had used back at the park on Naruto. You do not tell me who I can or can't marry, Sakura. Don't do it, Hinata. Why do you care? Because he doesn't love you. Thank you for reminding me of that fact once again, Sakura. Do you think I've forgotten that? You and I both know very well who he loves, who is always first in his thoughts and heart. We both also know who used that love to her convenience, breaking his heart beyond repair in the process. He knew what he was getting into when we dated. Sakura retorted bitingly. Did he? Looking back at it now, I highly doubt that. You knew what he meant to me and how much I loved him. And you obviously didn't care enough to let him know right from the beginning that I loved him and you didn't. Sakura was glaring daggers at her. It appeared that she had struck a nerve. Apparently that statement had more truth than she cared to admit. Sakura knew that Hinata was slowly convincing herself to marry Naruto. Desperate to regain control of the conversation, she said the only thing left that came to mind. Think about Hikaru. And then all of a sudden, she began to see everything clearly. Regardless of who Naruto loved, she'd been acting selfishly by not thinking about her son. Deep down, she knew that Neji had been right. Her son needed a father. Hinata turned and smiled at her. Thanks for reminding me. And Sakura smiled back, thinking that she had talked her out of it. The smile quickly vanished when Hinata said, I should accept because of Hikaru. He deserves to have a father. Haven't you been listening to me? He doesn't love you. So what? You're missing one important piece of information. The smile Hinata was wearing grew bigger as she thought about what Naruto had said earlier. He knows he doesn't have to marry me. I told him as much. He said he knew that, but he wanted to do it. It doesn't matter to me who holds his heart. I've known of arranged marriages that have lasted because both people based it on mutual respect and trust. I'm sure that Naruto-kun and I can achieve a marriage like that. Don't you see? Anxiety had gripped Sakura upon seeing Hinata's resolve. He just wants to marry you for the prestige that your name will provide him. His dream has always been to be Hokage. The Dobi is only using you to get what he's always wanted. That was the last straw. Unleashing a large amount of killing intent, Hinata activated her Byakugan and quickly lashed out, striking 3 Tenketsu points and driving the air from her lungs. Sakura crumpled onto the floor, gasping for breath and clutching her chest. This will be your only warning, Sakura. If you ever talk about Naruto-kun like that again, I'll juke in your body so bad you'll have to eat your meals through a straw for the next 6 months. Do you understand? Sakura could only nod at her since she was struggling to breathe right now. Do you honestly think Naruto-kun would do something like that? That he would use me to further his own ends? The words were rushing out and she continued relentlessly. Why do you want to take the only opportunity I have to live my life away from me? Is it that you can't stand the idea of him being with someone else? That you want him to pine for you forever and see him wallow in his loneliness? Or is it that you can't stand the fact that he wants me? Hinata received no answer, but she didn't need one. How could she be so stupid and allow pride to blind her? She thought back to the past and how often she used to dream of being in this position, and now here it was offered with no strings attached, and she may have ruined her chances completely. Hinata had come to Sakura looking for answers, but they were there all along. Maybe Naruto-kun hadn't asked her father for her hand in marriage. And maybe he hadn't asked her to marry him in the traditional way, on bended knee with a ring. And perhaps he hadn't shown a shred of affection, not even feigned it. He told her he didn't believe that love was real. But he was an honorable man, deeply wounded by his past just like her. He was lonely and reaching out for someone. No matter what the reasons were, she wanted to become his wife. She wanted it more than anything. And so she left Sakura's apartment, intent on finding Naruto no matter how long it took. She ran towards the hotel Naruto was staying at, hoping she wasn't too late. Upon arriving, the front desk informed her that he wasn't in his room and that they hadn't seen him. She asked how long his stay was scheduled for, and they said he was due to check out tomorrow. Thanking them, she turned and left. Tears began to fall down her face and memories of her childhood came to the surface. 8 years ago, she had resigned herself to the fact that Naruto would probably never come back to the village, and that her dreams would probably go unfulfilled. And now here he was, back again after all this time, and he actually wanted to marry her. And what did she do? She'd tried to talk him out of it, and had driven him away in the process. Now he was gone once again, maybe forever this time. She turned and began to walk despondently towards her home, wrapping her arms around herself in an attempt to hold in the pain. She realized what a fool she'd been, and she had no one to blame but herself. Why had she let this opportunity slip away from her? Why had she fought what her heart clearly wanted? The Hyuga compound. It was her home, at least for now, but she was going to be thrown out sooner or later. She was ashamed to her father and her clan. And even though she knew Neji would always take care of her and her son, it wasn't his burden to bear. He was married to Tenten and deserved to have a life and family of his own. It was dark when the sky decided to open its gates, giving way to a cold, persistent rain which perfectly matched her mood. Shivering in the cold and wallowing in her own self-pity, she didn't notice the figure standing next to the gate to the compound. She was scared at first because the darkness and rain didn't allow her to distinguish the blurry shape, but as soon as she activated her Byakugan she immediately knew who it was. She deactivated her Byakugan, terrified that this was all a dream. She lost the ability to speak as he stepped into the light. "What are you doing out of your house at this hour?" Did she hear tenderness in his voice? He removed the coat he was wearing and put it on her, trying to cover her from the rain, if that was even possible since the garment was just as soaked as she was. She looked at it. Ankle length with short sleeves, colored red with black flames along the bottom. She recognized it immediately. It was the same one he was wearing the day he defeated Pain. Despite what everyone thought, Naruto wasn't stupid. Oblivious maybe, but not stupid. He was fully aware of the significance of the code and what it represented. And he was counting on the effect it would have on Hinata. Hinata knew what the code was, and the memories that it brought back were almost too much to bear. He had been waiting for her. She was mesmerized by the intensity of his gaze and couldn't look away. Her only thought was that she hoped that he didn't know she'd been crying, and that her face was wet because of the rain. Besides, you'll catch a cold walking in the rain like this. I guess when we get married I'll have to watch over you more closely. If you get sick, who's going to cook for me and wash my clothes? He smiled at her and winked. Married? The tone of his voice became tender and concerned. Why not? We're two lonely souls and we both understand the pain of not being accepted for who we are. And I think you've forgotten that I never go back on my word. When I decide to do something, I won't let anything stop me. I want to marry you, Hinata. Very much. She knew the truth of that statement. When Naruto-kun insisted on something there was no stopping him. She stammered, feeling taken aback. She swallowed hard, trying to calm down, but her heart was running at full speed, making it difficult to do. Her breath caught in her throat as he raised his hand to wipe the tears from her face. How could he have known that she had been crying? Cammy, his touch was delightful. The stroke of his hand on her skin felt like wildfire. She closed her eyes and leaned into his palm, lost in the sensation that it was bringing. The look on his face turned apologetic. Please forgive me. I shouldn't have asked about Hikaru's father. You're absolutely right. It's none of my business and I promise from now on I won't bring up the subject of his parentage again to you. He took both of her hands in his. She opened her eyes and stared at her small, white hands that seemed so lost in his huge tanned hands. The sensation that ran through her arms to the center of her being awakened a whirlwind of emotions inside her. I think we both can make this marriage work and that you and I deserve this opportunity. He looked deep into her eyes and smiled for a moment. And I make you the promise of a lifetime that I will always be there for you and Hikaru. Hinata was teetering on the edge of consciousness. He suddenly let go of her hands and reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a 5-carat princess-cut amethyst and diamond engagement ring. Still looking deep into her eyes, he dropped to one knee and said, Hinata Hyuga. You are one of my most precious people. Would you do me the honor of marrying me and letting me be a father to Hikaru? Hinata couldn't think, couldn't breathe. She was going to lose it, her body was going haywire and her legs were giving out. The intensity of the moment was so great that there was only one thing she could possibly do. She fainted. Naruto caught her bridal style, stopping her fall before she hit the ground. Holding her close as he carried her into the house, he smiled and whispered in her ear. I'll take that as a yes. Hinata stirred and opened her eyes. She blinked a few times to take in her surroundings and noticed that she was in her room, in bed. Nice to see you back among the living, cousin. Turning her head, she saw Neji sitting in a chair that had been turned around, leaning against the backrest. He was grinning from ear to ear. Still a bit groggy, she looked at him and asked, What happened? How did I get here? Naruto met you at the main entrance. He proposed and you passed out. He chuckled a bit and said, I guess I was right. You can't talk to him without fainting. Her face turning red from embarrassment, she tried hiding under the covers. It was then that she realized that she was wearing only her underwear. Ni-san, where are my clothes? Hinata, calm down. After you fainted, Naruto carried you into the compound and put you here in your room before leaving. I had Yui get you out of your wet clothes so you wouldn't catch a cold, and she put you into bed. Naruto-kun carried me in here? Yes, and in case you're wondering if it was all a dream, Neji pointed to the corner of her room, and hanging there to dry was the coat that Naruto had so lovingly put around her shoulders. Neji stood and said, now that you're awake, I'll be going. Tenten must be wondering where I am. He opened the door and just as he was about to leave, he looked back at her. His eyes twinkled mischievously and said, by the way, it's a beautiful ring. Congratulations. And with that, he closed the door behind him. She suddenly looked down and there, on the third finger of her left hand was the ring Naruto had used to propose. He must have put it on her before he left. The amethyst seemed to match the color of her eyes, and was surrounded by a halo of miniature diamonds. It must have cost a fortune. And the subtle fact that the amethyst on the ring was a princess cut wasn't lost on her, either. He still thinks of me as a princess, her heart swelled as she looked at the ring once again. Her ring, she corrected herself. It belonged to her and no one else. Even more amazing was that it seemed to fit perfectly on her finger and didn't need to be sized. Maybe this was a sign from Kami that finally, things would work out. That this wouldn't be another opportunity missed. That she would have the ability to live her life, free from the disappointments of her clan. Lying down on the bed, she hugged her knees to her chest and cried herself to sleep. Only this time, they weren't tears of sadness but were instead tears of joy. Barely a week had passed in Konoha. The engagement had formally been announced and the news was spreading throughout the village. During that time, Naruto and Hinata were seen spending quite a bit of time together, talking of matters pertaining to the wedding as well as renewing their friendship. Kakashi knew he needed to have a conversation with Naruto and thought it would be best to have it sooner rather than later. He scheduled a meeting for noon in his office, intent on discussing a great many things with the future Hokage. At the appointed time, Naruto arrived at the tower. Remembering how Kakashi used to enter the office when Tsunade was in charge, he sent chakra into his feet and ran up the side of the building and onto the balcony so that he could enter through the window. Sitting on the window sill, he watched Kakashi as he rubbed his temples, attempting to massage away the massive headache he apparently had. It appeared that being Hokage was far more stressful and demanding than he had originally thought. Not that it would deter him, of course. He still wanted the job. Kakashi turned around and said, "Nice to see you're here on time. However, would it be too much to ask for you to use the door?" Naruto decided to have some fun and said, "Yeah, actually it would. My flames of youth are burning brightly today." Yash. Striking the nice guy pose, he smiled and gave Kakashi a big thumbs up. Kakashi groaned. Without the tiniest bit of humor in his voice, he said, "Not funny, Naruto. Not funny at all. Are you kidding, Kakashi-sensei? It's hilarious." Hopping down from the window, he walked to the chair opposite his desk and sat down. "So, you decided to accept Hiyashi's proposal and marry Hinata. I would like to personally congratulate you. She's a wonderful woman and I'm sure that you'll both be very happy together." "Thank you very much. Word on the street is that you made it almost 5 minutes into the meeting before accepting the offer and telling Hiyashi to shove it." Inwardly, Kakashi was pleased with himself. Naruto in some ways was still just as predictable. His idea of having Hiyashi belittle Hinata had worked like a charm. He should have bet Tsunade that it would work because he would have made a fortune knowing her luck as the legendary sucker. More or less. Listening to that man makes my teeth itch. He's going to be your father-in-law, you know. Don't remind me. Also, this morning I received the marriage contract from the Hyuga clan for approval. I find it interesting that it arrived today considering the news was all over the village several days ago. Naruto shrugged. It's not really that big of a deal. I was having a bit of a disagreement with Hiyashi and Neji regarding Hinata's dowry. They insisted that I take it in order to assure that Hinata would continue to live the life to which she'd become accustomed. I told them that I didn't want it and didn't need it to marry her. In the end, I won and the condition was removed before sending it to you. I imagine it filled you with a certain sense of self-worth telling Hiyashi you didn't need his money." He rolled his eyes and said, "You have no idea. I also heard that you purchased a rather large home in the new resort on the outskirts of the village." Suddenly, Naruto recognized what was going on. This was going to be one of those meetings. Not two friends talking about old times, but more of a friendly interrogation. He had an idea as to where this conversation was going to end up but vowed to remain impassive for as long as he could. Adopting a blank stare, he said, "So? Add to that the fact that you've been buying expensive gifts all week and sending them to Hinata." He remained silent. "There are rumors running around the village that you're squandering Hinata's dowry. But since you didn't accept it, we both know that's not true, right? Where are you going with this?" Kakashi activated the privacy seals on the room before standing up and walking over to the windows in his office from which he could see all of Konoha. Naruto remained seated, staring impassively at the back of his former teacher. 2 years ago, our intelligence network began to hear stories of strangers passing through the Land of Fire. They were part of an elite organization called the Minai Segi. Very few can be members. Naruto narrowed his eyes. What's that got to do with me? Maybe nothing. But then again, where there's smoke there's usually fire. He turned around and walked toward the blonde. This organization is very strict. Few choose to remain after being accepted. They train for days on end under brutal conditions, not stopping to eat or sleep during the entire time. Sounds rather far-fetched if you ask me. More like fairy tales that people have created to scare young children at night. It's impossible for something like that to be real. Kakashi stopped in front of him and continued as if he hadn't been interrupted. The members embrace a life of solitude and restriction where they learn to control their carnal appetites, learning forbidden jutsu that only people with a firm grasp of themselves can achieve. Naruto looked at him impassively. Their missions could almost be considered suicidal. For those who believe that they'd found happiness only to suffer the pain of betrayal, it's the perfect place to find their release in death. He paused for a brief moment. Missions are usually paid for by daimyo and other members of nobility. The payment from a single mission is usually greater than a ninja's annual income. Leaning closer, Kakashi stared hard at him. Which brings us to your rather, shall we say, extravagant expenses lately. I've been waiting for the right time to have this conversation with you. The young ninja shrugged. So what if I've spent a bit of money lately? It's nobody's business but my own. I haven't had a need to use a lot of the money I've made on missions over the years. Roll up your sleeves. No, if you have nothing to hide, why don't you do it? I don't have to take this. Naruto stood up, determined to leave. Kakashi firmly said, "Sit down, Naruto. I'm not finished yet." For a few seconds, he feared Naruto would disobey. But the young man did as he ordered. I don't need to see the marks on your arms to know that you were a member. The blonde sighed, defeated. Fine, you got me. I was a member. Is there a problem with that? No. But as the Hokage, it's important for me to know what resources I have available for the protection of Konoha. He softly added, I'm not judging you, Naruto. All missions you led, at least those that came to my ears, seemed to be justified. I don't know if I'd call them justified. Naruto, in life everything isn't just black or white. There's also a middle ground where things are gray. Many ninjas live our entire lives immersed in the middle where right and wrong aren't clearly defined. Kakashi tried to lighten the mood a bit. He smiled and said, so one of my students was a member of the Minai Segi. And not only a member but also led a squad. Only for 5 years. Naruto shrugged, not giving it much importance. That means after 3 years of joining the organization you already had a squad. Kakashi could not contain the pride in his voice. He sat at his desk and crossed his arms in front of him. I'm curious, how many forbidden jutsu did you learn? I'm not really sure. About 20, give or take. At least the ones I'm sure I can fully control. Is it true that members rarely use them? Naruto nodded, yes, the priority of a member is to master the jutsu for our own personal growth. We actually try to depend on our own strength and skills to complete a mission. Only in very extreme cases do we use them. Kakashi nodded in acceptance. Did you ever have the need to use one? Only once. And can you teach me some? The blonde laughed, come on, sensei, I'm sure you know that we're forbidden to do so. I figured as much, but it never hurts to ask. After a prolonged silence, Naruto asked, was this the only reason you brought me here, Kakashi-sensei? To get information about the Minai Segi? Kakashi looked down at his desk and said, that's partially correct, Naruto. However, another part is personal and rather important to me. There was a moment of silence as he struggled to find the right words to say next. When he looked up, Naruto could see his lone visible eye was slightly moist. The only other time he had seen Kakashi this emotional was when he talked about Rin. I admit that we haven't been fair to you. There was genuine sincerity in his voice. This village treated you poorly for a good portion of your life, and you were only accepted after you defeated pain. Then, you saved the village again, and possibly the world, during the Fourth Shinobi War. For those deeds alone, everyone should have acknowledged you as a legend and begged you to forgive them for the appalling way they behaved towards you. Instead, here we are 8 years later and people seem to have forgotten what you did and who you truly are, the hero of the leaf and son of Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage. Naruto placed a hand to the back of his neck, feeling a little uncomfortable with the emotion in the room right now. It doesn't matter, sensei. I did what I had to do. Kakashi rose and came around the front of his desk and stood in front of Naruto. Of course it does. It matters to me, not only as Hokage but as your former sensei as well. You returned to the village and we once again shouldered you with a responsibility that frankly wasn't yours to bear. Most people don't care about the right or wrong of things, they just take the easy way out. However, you always cared enough to do the right thing even if that meant doing things the hard way. And you never did it for selfish reasons, it was to protect those who are precious to you, and sometimes those who weren't. We all owe you an apology and I offer you one on behalf of the entire village. And then before a stunned Naruto, Kakashi bowed low before him. Never in his wildest dreams would Naruto have believed that one day the Hokage of the Leaf Village would be bowing in front of him, offering an apology. It was a surreal moment and frankly a little embarrassing as well. Thank you Kakashi-sensei. I accept your apology, but can we just let the past be the past? I'd rather just forget about it. Standing up and nodding his head in acknowledgement, Kakashi walked back around his desk and sat down. That brings me to the final reason why I brought you here. Your past. Excuse me? Your past, Naruto. There are things about your past that even I, as Hokage, don't know. But I do know that you left this village because the situation and emotional pain had become unbearable. For starters, your last fight with Sasuke was very unpleasant for the both of you. That was the understatement of the year. Kakashi knew that the word unpleasant could never accurately describe what must have been a horrific battle, one that neither one of them had wanted to talk about. He still remembered very vividly the condition in which he'd found them both. He'd brought them to the hospital. After Sasuke had healed enough he disappeared again. Kakashi heard a rumor that Sasuke had talked with Naruto before he left to explain why he was leaving again, but no one could ever confirm it. And if you add in what you went through with Sakura, I'd rather not talk about it. Naruto cut him off icily. Kakashi sighed. You should. Apparently, it still affects you. What good will it do, sensei? It won't change the past. But it might help the future. Talking about it is cathartic. Having someone else listen to the problem rather than attempt to rationalize it yourself can sometimes make all the difference in the world. Kakashi looked at him and said, if you're willing to talk, I'll listen. You have my word that the conversation will never be known outside this room. Naruto thought for a few minutes about his offer. Would it be so bad to talk with someone else who might understand? Besides Sasuke and himself, the one person who would know the most about Sakura was Kakashi. Naruto leaned back in his chair and sighed. Fine, where should I start? I usually find the beginning to be a great place. And you don't have to go into great detail about anything if you don't want to. Thanks for the offer, but I didn't plan on it. He looked to the side and said, it's basically no secret how I felt about Sakura from my earliest days in Team 7. I admired her for who she was, smart, beautiful, hell, she still is beautiful. She was the first girl to publicly acknowledge me as a person rather than the demon spawn the rest of the village called me. Kakashi winced when he heard that. Go on, but no matter how hard I tried, she always had eyes for Sasuke. I mean, the abuse I received from her was, for lack of a better word, painful, but I thought that by taking the abuse, eventually she would see how much I cared about her and give me a chance. Give us a chance. It doesn't work that way, Naruto. Abuse is abuse, whether physical or verbal. And intentional or not, Sakura was both. I know that now, sensei. But you know what it's like when you're young and in love. You think you know everything when in fact you know nothing. You become blind to reality and reason. Kakashi could only nod. Well, after the incident happened with Sasuke and he left, I thought I would try again and ask Sakura out. She accepted, but looking back on it now I'm not sure if it was out of pity or spite. He stood and walked to the window. For a year, I gave everything I had to her, my heart, my soul, she was the center of my world. And every day she grew a little more distant. Until the day I wanted to formalize our relationship. I'll never forget that day. Naruto couldn't keep Sakura's cold words from coming back. She basically told me that I was merely a stepping stone. A way to pass the time and forget the void that Sasuke had left in her heart. She said there was nothing that would ever come of us, and that what little we had, if it ever existed in the first place, was dead. He turned, walking back to his chair. It was at that point I realized what I had become to Sakura, an annoying fanboy who foolishly believed in an unreachable dream. Despite the pain, I still wanted to see her happy, even if it wasn't with me. So I went to find Sasuke and let him know how Sakura felt about him. After that, it would be up to him whether or not to return. Sitting back down, he finished his tale. Regardless of his decision, I decided to leave the village because I was terrified of losing control. The situation had become too much to bear and there was nothing here for me but pain. You know the rest of the story. I left, Sasuke returned and I decided to join the Minai Segi. After a tense minute or so, Kakashi said in a sad voice. Unfortunately Naruto, you learned a lesson the hard way, like many of us often do. You can't dictate who the heart will love. It only makes things more difficult in the end for everyone. He tilted his head to the side. For what it's worth though, I honestly believe that Sakura wants to be your friend. While it's not what you may have wanted, it's certainly better than having her hate you. Naruto sighed. I know sensei, I know. I just wish sometimes that things could have been different with my life. With a haunted look in his eyes, Kakashi replied, so do I, Naruto. So do I. Removing the privacy seals from the room so that Naruto could leave, he finished. But I think you might find that a life with Hinata can be more fulfilling and rewarding than a life with Sakura ever could have been. Naruto pondered those words as rose from his seat and walked towards the door. Thank you for allowing me to get that off my chest, Kakashi-sensei. I think it helped a little. Anytime, Naruto. And if there is ever anything I can do for you, please just let me know. Reaching out for the doorknob, Naruto stopped. After a moment of silence, he said, actually, there is one thing that... The sound of something hitting the desk made him turn around. What's that? Kakashi's eyes smiled at him. That, Naruto, is the one thing. At the same time Naruto was scheduled to meet with Kakashi, Hinata was on her way to the hospital. She needed to talk with Tsunade about a few things related to Naruto, and couldn't think of a better time than when he was busy in a meeting with the Hokage. Knocking politely on the door, Tsunade told her to come in. Shizune was there and it looked like they were having an important meeting. "I apologize, Lady Tsunade. I didn't mean to interrupt. I can come by later." "Nonsense, Hinata. Please come in. Shizune and I were merely discussing how to best implement some new battlefield medical procedures for severe traumatic limb salvage. Not a very exciting subject, but necessary nonetheless. What can I do for you? I wanted to talk with you about Naruto-kun. He's currently meeting with the Hokage, and if it's not too much trouble." Tsunade interrupted her with a smile. "Of course, Hinata, I'd be glad to. Shizune, could you please give us some privacy? And tell everyone that other than matters of life and death, I'm not to be disturbed." She smirked and said, "Why don't you go chase Iruka around his desk at the academy for lunch?" "Lady Tsunade," Shizune said, shocked. However, they could tell by the look on her face that she was considering it. "I'll see you in an hour or so." As she left the office, Tsunade activated the seals for privacy. "So, before we start you have to let me see it." "See what?" "The ring, Hinata. What else?" Tsunade said, almost giggling with excitement. Smiling, she held out her left hand so that she could get a good look. Tsunade's breath caught in her throat at the beauty of it, marveling at how it matched Hinata's eyes as well as. "Princess cut, huh?" Hinata nodded. "So he still considers you a princess. I guess I don't give the little gaki enough credit sometimes. It's a very subtle hint as well as being incredibly sweet and romantic." "I know. When he gave it to me I fainted." Tsunade laughed. "Still having that problem?" Hinata looked down, blushing. I guess. I thought I'd gotten better since becoming a mother. I was sure that I would be able to hold out, and I was at first, but when I had been crying, and he raised his hand to wipe away my tears. When he touched my cheek it felt like my heart would burst through my chest. Then he produced the ring and bent down on one knee to propose. Her face was flushed just thinking about it. That's when I fainted. The moment was just too much. That's perfectly normal, Hinata. I'm sure quite a few women would pass out if they were in the same situation. It's not just that, Lady Tsunade. Hinata closed her eyes, thinking of the blonde. It's everything he does. I mean, I'm not sure he's even aware that he's doing it, but it's just the way he naturally is. The emotions that he brings out in me are almost addictive. Tsunade's eyes twinkled with mirth. You got it bad, girl. And you're obviously bothered by it, but the question is why? Hinata took a few breaths to calm down before opening her eyes and saying, Sakura. Pardon me? Sakura is what's bothering me, Lady Tsunade. It bothers me that he loves her and that she will always be first in his heart. She stood up and began pacing. When we were younger, I always watched Naruto-kun. How just by being who he was, he made me stronger. I wanted him to see me, to notice how I felt about him. I never had the courage to tell him how I felt until the battle with pain. She thought briefly of the coat that Naruto had put on her that night. But even after that, he only had eyes for Sakura. She stopped pacing and looked at Tsunade. When they started dating, I felt so alone. My heart hurt so badly that it felt like I was dying, but I still wanted Naruto-kun to be truly happy. So I hid my pain behind a friendly mask in front of them. Tsunade nodded in acceptance. Everyone knew about Hinata's love for Naruto, except Naruto himself. But everyone who saw them together noticed how different they acted towards one another. Naruto-kun was always kind, caring and considerate while Sakura was, well, indifferent. The words were just rushing forth. Tsunade could tell that this had been a long time coming, and she needed to get this off her chest. Hinata sat back down. I don't know what she said to him when they broke up, Lady Tsunade. I confronted Sakura at her apartment and asked her what she'd said to him, and she told me to stop asking and move on to another subject because what happened between them was dead and buried. She looked into Tsunade's eyes. We went on that mission for almost a year, and never once did we talk about what happened between the two of them. But whatever it was, I fear that it broke Naruto-kun's heart beyond repair. What makes you think that? The tears were starting to fall again as she said, because he told me so. That day after he saw you, we talked in the park. He told me that he believed that love isn't real. Tsunade's voice caught in her throat. She never would have thought something so cold could come from the boy who always seemed so happy. Hinata put her face in her hands, still crying. 8 years ago when he left the village, I had given up all hope that he would return. And now he's back, and we're getting married. It's a wonderful dream and a frightening reality at the same time, because I don't want to be second place in his heart." She looked up, her eyes pleading. "I told Sakura that it didn't matter to me who holds his heart, but that's a lie because it does. I don't want part of him, I want all of him. Including the part that Sakura holds." Tsunade could hear the anguish in her voice. Quickly moving around the desk, she hugged Hinata tightly and stroked her back, whispering soothing words while waiting for her to calm down. After a few minutes, Hinata's crying began to diminish and Tsunade lifted her head from her shoulder. "Feel better?" "A little, Lady Tsunade. But it still doesn't change how things are. Hinata, we both know that Naruto has been treated unfairly. Not just by Sakura but by the people of this village as well. You know what his childhood was like." Tsunade looked thoughtful for a moment before saying, "And if his heart was broken beyond repair, I sincerely doubt that he would have come back to help you. I think he's just hurting. And he needs someone to help fix what's broken. But how can I do this? How can I help him find what he believes is gone forever? Give him time, Hinata. There's an old saying, time heals all wounds. Just be there for him, and love him no matter what happens. Be careful not to push or pressure him. He needs to come to the realization all on his own that you mean more to him than Sakura ever did. And when he does, I guarantee that you will hold his heart in the palm of your hand." Hinata sniffed and said, "Do you really think so?" "I know so, Hinata. The little Gaki may be older and somewhat wiser, but in some ways he's still the same old Naruto. He wants someone to love and love him back. It's just that simple." Tsunade grinned wickedly and said, "And I think once he gets a taste of you, he'll find he likes it better than ramen." "Lady Tsunade." She laughed and returned to her seat. "I'm just teasing, Hinata." Maybe. It was then that an idea came to Tsunade. One she should have considered before now. "Now that I think about it, I might have an idea on how we can jump-start the process of healing Naruto's broken heart." Hinata brightened up at hearing this. "Really? How?" She smirked and said, "Sorry, Hinata. I think I'll save it for your wedding. You can even consider it my gift to the two of you, if you like. But you'll have to wait to find out what it is. But I want to help. Sorry, this is one thing you can't help me with. You're just going to have to trust me." Hinata chewed her lower lip in thought before nodding her head in acceptance. "Thank you, Hinata. Now, is there anything else I can do for you?" "Yes, Lady Tsunade. There was one other reason that I came here." Her face became serious. "I wish to ask a favor of you." Ing an eyebrow, she said, "A favor? What favor would that be?" "I would like to ask if you would preside over the wedding ceremony between Naruto-kun and me." He wanted Kakashi-sensei to officiate, but I told him I had someone else in mind. Hinata bowed her head with respect. "I would be most honored if you would do it." Tsunade was stunned speechless at the request. After a few moments she returned the bow and said, "No, the honor would be mine. And I gladly accept. Thank you, Lady Tsunade. I should be going now. Naruto-kun joins me for tea every afternoon at the Hyuga compound, and I need to be ready for him when he gets there." She deactivated the privacy seals, and Hinata thanked her once again and left. Tsunade rested her head on her hands, lost in thought. There was so much to do, and so little time. She definitely needed some help, and the only person she could trust with this was Shizune. "I'll put her right to work on it when she gets back from lunch," she said to herself as one more thought raced through her mind. "I get to marry the Gaki off, huh?" She silently thanked Kami for this gift. "Maybe I'll get lucky and the two of them will give me some Naruto grandbabies before I die." Naruto walked back over to the desk and looked at what Kakashi had dropped in front of him. It was a mission report from 8 years ago. Is this what I think it is, Kakashi-sensei?" "Yes, Naruto, it is. It's the report folder for the mission that Tsunade sent Sakura and Hinata on 8 years ago." Kakashi's lone eye turned sad. "But before you get your hopes up, I think you should open it and take a look." He hesitated to open the file. But when he did, needless to say he was shocked. "What the hell is this? There's practically nothing here. Everything important has been blacked out. That, Naruto, is called a redaction seal. It's used occasionally when the village performs highly covert missions that require the utmost secrecy. When this happens, the report is filed and a redaction seal is placed on it which blacks out the important information. I've just never seen one used on a mission that wasn't deemed S rank or above before." Naruto flipped through the report, reading what little information was still legible. He saw Sakura and Hinata mentioned several times throughout the document, along with the dates and total cost of the mission in addition to one more reference, reciprocity agreement. What does this mean? Reciprocity agreement? Another rarely used contract stipulation, Naruto. There are times when services are performed by other villages as a favor to Konoha. The cost of the mission is borne by the other village in exchange for future payment from us. Payment? What kind of payment? Usually it comes in the form of mission requests. However, based on the total cost of what you see here, it would take 4A rank or 1S rank mission to reimburse whatever village this was. Naruto stared at the report, lost in thought. After a moment he said, "Is there any way to remove this? What did you call it? Reduction seal?" Kakashi sighed. "It's called a redaction seal, Naruto. Normally it can be removed by the Hokage. However, this one is a special variant. It's a blood seal that can only be removed by the person who did it in the first place or if the cost of the mission is repaid in full. In this particular case, the blood seal was placed by Tsunade." There were a few moments of silence as they both understood the significance of that statement. Asking Tsunade was pointless because she wasn't going to remove the seal no matter what. Naruto was getting loud and frustrated. "So where does this leave us?" "Leave me? I'm right back at the beginning with no more answers than I had before. Why did you even show this to me in the first place?" "I showed you for several reasons, Naruto. First of all, I wanted you to know why I can't tell you anything about the mission. Which is basically because I know only a little more than you do. Secondly, we at least have some information to go by, particularly dates and a cost of the mission. And I'm sure that at some point the marker for payment will be called." Looking confused he said, "Marker? What's that mean?" "It's the last piece of the puzzle. When mission files like the one you hold are redacted, another copy is kept with the village that performed the services for us. This is done so that they can provide proof positive for us as to the nature of the mission, as well as services provided for fair repayment. Once verified, we perform the requested services as reimbursement." He raised his eyebrow. "This is also the reason that a redaction seal goes away when the mission is repaid in full. At that point, we would have access to the non-redacted mission folder that was held at the other village and the need for secrecy would be null and void." He pointed at the folder. "The fact that the folder remains redacted means that the marker hasn't been called yet. And you have my word that if such a request comes across my desk you'll be the first to know." Looking up, he finished his thought. "In the meantime, I promise I won't stop looking in the mission report archives for anything that might help." Naruto was silent for a few moments before closing the file. It was then he realized something. How did you know what I was going to ask for?" Kakashi softly said, "Because Naruto, it's exactly what I would have asked for if I were in your position." Naruto swallowed the lump that was in his throat. "Thank you for everything, Kakashi-sensei. I should be going now. I meet Hinata at the compound every afternoon for tea and I don't want to be late." And with that, he turned and left. Kakashi watched him leave, the words of his promise still lingering in his mind. He wanted answers, not only for Naruto but for himself. As Hokage, he didn't like it when there were facts he didn't know, and in this case the reason had a face, and it was Tsunade. Her refusal to provide him with the information he wanted aggravated him to no end, and he swore to Kami that he would do whatever it took to find out what she was hiding from him. Naruto was walking back to his hotel, thinking about the conversation that he just had with Kakashi. To say that he was stunned by the discussion was putting it mildly. Kakashi was crafty and far smarter than he'd given him credit for. He hadn't expected to confess to being a member of the Minai Segi at all. On top of that, he couldn't believe that he'd discussed briefly what had occurred between Sakura and himself 8 years ago. But it was the second and fourth part of the conversation that confused him the most. The fact that Kakashi had admitted that the village, and more specifically Kakashi himself, hadn't been fair to him for a good part of his life wasn't news at all. No, the shocking part was his sincere and heartfelt apology to him about the burdens he'd accepted, either by force or by choice, along with the bow of respect. And then there was the mission report. It was now clear why Kakashi couldn't tell him about the mission. But what still remained unclear was the reason why it was sealed in the first place. Add to that the fact that the redaction seal seemed to be special. Tsunade had used her blood to make sure the information couldn't be revealed by anyone other than her. Kakashi had said that the marker hadn't been called yet, and that if he heard anything Naruto would be the first to know. He had to trust him on this. Otherwise the truth behind the mission would never be revealed. Unless of course, Hinata told him. And he wasn't counting on that happening anytime soon, if ever. His thoughts turned to his fiancée. He had promised her that he wouldn't bring up the subject of Hikaru's parentage again to her, and he never went back on a promise. But that didn't mean that he couldn't go looking for the answers on his own. Son of a bitch, this line of thought was giving him a headache. It was probably best to just forget about it for now, get home and clean up before he met with Hinata. He was sure there would be plenty of time to think about this later. At the same time, Hinata was walking back to the Hyuga compound thinking about the conversation she just had with Tsunade. She hadn't intended to be so emotional about the situation with Naruto, however she found that once she started talking about it she couldn't stop. Ever since that day last week when Naruto proposed, the entire scene in front of the compound played over and over in her mind. She had wanted to say something, say anything, but found that she couldn't. Suddenly she was a 13-year-old girl again, stammering words and fainting when he talked to her. It was appalling to her that even after 8 years, the strength and resolve she apparently thought she'd gained had been a fantasy, and it galled her that he could still do this to her without even thinking about it. But at the same time, it was also exhilarating to know that her future husband was someone who she could love so much. She had always known that she would probably be forced into an arranged marriage to strengthen the clan, and that love wasn't even a consideration. But now she was marrying someone who she had loved as a child, and judging by the way she'd acted that night apparently still loved. And that was what brought her to Lady Tsunade's office. She knew that the boy she'd loved was buried deep within the man he is now. She wanted to help find that lost part of him, but she was afraid that if she did find it that part would hold the name of someone, Sakura. The fear that Sakura would forever hold that piece of his heart was overwhelming. And as that fear gnawed at her stomach, she thought of the words Tsunade had just said to her. Give him time, Hinata. There's an old saying, time heals all wounds. Just be there for him, and love him no matter what happens. Be careful not to push or pressure him. He needs to come to the realization all on his own that you mean more to him than Sakura ever did. And when he does, I guarantee that you will hold his heart in the palm of your hand. She was so unsure of those words. It would be so wonderful if he loved her as she loved him. Tsunade said he would realize it just by being there for him and giving him time. But how much time did he need? When would it happen, if ever? And what if it never happened? What would she do then? Kami, this line of thinking was driving her mad. Hinata's thought back to that night a week ago, when this all started. The proposal, and the way Naruto had done it had been her ultimate undoing. Dropping to one knee and showing her the ring had been incredibly romantic, but wearing the coat from his fight with Pain was the most devious. He had known exactly what it would do to her. Never mind that it worked. An idea came to her, and a wicked smile suddenly appeared on her face. Maybe it was time to turn the tables on Naruto and make him stammer for once. She started walking quickly towards the compound. She had a plan and was going to need help to make it happen. She just hoped it worked. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.